The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Subject line, schedule update, effective immediately. I stare at my phone screen, standing in the middle of the warehouse floor where I'd worked for 7 years. My hours have been cut from 40 to 15 per week. No explanation, no warning, no meeting, just a cold, corporate email that shattered my ability to pay rent. My hands trembled as I read it twice, then 3 times, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the numbers were clear. 15 hours. That was barely enough to cover groceries, let alone my car payment, insurance, or the medical bills from my father's recent surgery. Around me, forklifts beeped and boxes scraped across concrete. Nobody noticed that my world had just collapsed. I'd been the reliable one here, the person who covered every emergency shift, who trained new hires, who stayed late when shipments arrived unexpectedly. And now, without a single conversation, I was being erased. I looked up at the office windows on the second floor. Someone up there had decided I was disposable. The question burning in my chest wasn't just why. It was who had the power to do this without even a phone call. The next morning, I walked into the administrative office. My manager, Derek, looked uncomfortable the moment he saw me. "I need to understand what happened," I said calmly. "Why were my hours cut?" Derek shifted papers on his desk, avoiding eye contact. "It wasn't my decision, Alex. The directive came from upper management." "Upper management?" I repeated. "I've never had a single complaint about my work. My attendance is perfect. I don't understand." He sighed, lowering his voice. "Look, between us, it was Vanessa. She's been reorganizing staffing for her father's efficiency project. Vanessa Carlisle, the CEO's 24-year-old daughter who joined the company 6 months ago with a vague title like operations consultant. She had no management experience, no logistics background, just a famous last name and her father's unconditional trust. She cut my hours." My voice stayed level, but my pulse hammered. "Without even meeting me?" Derek shrugged helplessly. "She's been making a lot of changes." I tried to push back, but he trailed off, and I understood. Nobody questioned Vanessa Carlisle. I thanked him and left, my mind racing. This wasn't about efficiency. This was about power. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by bills. Rent due in 12 days. Car payment overdue by 1 week. My father's prescription refills coming up. The math was brutal and simple. I couldn't survive on 15 hours. My phone buzzed with texts from coworkers who'd heard the news. They were outraged on my behalf, but their sympathy couldn't pay my bills. I drafted a budget cutting everything non-essential, but even eating rice and beans wouldn't bridge the gap. Sleep came in restless pieces. I kept calculating, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. By dawn, exhaustion had carved hollows under my eyes. But something else had happened in those dark hours. The panic had crystallized into something harder, clearer. I'd spent 7 years being the person everyone could count on. I'd sacrificed weekends, holidays, sleep. I'd protected this company's reputation more than once. And Vanessa Carlisle had reduced me to a number on a spreadsheet she'd probably never even looked at twice. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. But I also wasn't going to accept this silently. Not anymore. When I arrived for my reduced shift on Thursday, the whispers started immediately. "Heard they're phasing you out," someone murmured near the loading dock. I pretended not to hear, but the words stung like wasps. At lunch, I sat alone in the break room. 2 employees I trained walked in, saw me, and suddenly remembered they needed to eat outside. The message was clear. I was tainted now, associated with failure. People feared whatever had marked me might be contagious. The worst moment came when I overheard Patrick from receiving talking to a new hire. "Don't bother learning from Alex," he said, loud enough for me to hear. "Won't be around much longer anyway." I kept my face neutral, my hand steady around my coffee cup. But inside, humiliation burned. 7 years of loyalty, and I'd become the person others used as a cautionary tale. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend, Jordan. "How are you holding up?" I typed back, "I'm fine." The lie came easily, because the truth that I felt invisible, disposable, erased was too raw to share. That night, I barely slept again. But this time, it wasn't just worry keeping me awake. It was something else, something calculating. I spent the weekend remembering, not torturing myself, but deliberately cataloging every moment I'd gone beyond my job description. 3 years ago, a shipping error nearly cost the company its biggest client. I caught it at 11 p.m. while doing a routine check nobody else bothered with anymore. I'd personally driven 4 hours to correct the delivery, using my own gas money, and never mentioned it to anyone except Derek. 2 years ago, when a warehouse fire at our supplier threatened our inventory, I'd worked 70 hours that week coordinating emergency alternatives. The CEO had sent a company-wide email praising our dedicated team, without naming anyone specifically. Last year, when a journalist started investigating labor complaints at a competitor, rumors began circulating about our company too. I'd quietly organized better safety protocols and documentation to protect us from similar scrutiny. That scandal never touched us. I've been the safety net beneath this company's reputation, catching problems before they became crises. And they'd never even noticed, because that was the point. I made their jobs easier by being invisible. Until Vanessa Carlisle decided I was expendable. But here's what she didn't know. Invisible people see everything. Monday morning, Vanessa made her first public appearance in the warehouse. She swept through with an entourage, 2 assistants and Derek, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She was petite, polished, wearing designer clothes too expensive for a place where people worked with their hands. Everything about her screamed privilege. The confidence, the casual way she gestured at equipment she'd never operated, the expectation that everyone would stop working to listen. "We're optimizing operational efficiency," she announced to the gathered workers. Some positions were overstaffed. These adjustments ensure our competitiveness in the market. Her eyes swept over us like we were interchangeable parts. When her gaze landed on me, there was no recognition. She didn't even know who I was. Just another face in the crowd she'd reduced to a line item. "Change is uncomfortable," she continued, "but necessary. Those who adapt will thrive. Those who resist." She smiled, leaving the threat unfinished. "Well, you understand." Someone asked about the criteria for the cuts. Vanessa's smile tightened. "That's proprietary information. Trust that every decision serves the company's best interests." As she left, she laughed at something her assistant said. The sound echoed across the warehouse, bright, careless, untouchable. That afternoon, someone unexpected appeared beside my workstation. Gerald Hutchins, the company's senior accountant, who'd been with the firm for 23 years. "Alex," he said quietly, "can we talk?" "Not here." We walked to the far corner of the warehouse, away from security cameras and curious ears. Gerald looked troubled, his usually jovial face drawn tight. "I've been noticing things," he said carefully. "Financial irregularities. Small at first, but patterns are emerging. Then I heard about your hours being cut, and—" He paused. "You've always been observant. Have you noticed anything unusual about recent operations?" I thought about it. Vanessa implemented a new vendor for office supplies 3 months ago. Derek mentioned the costs seemed high, but she insisted. Gerald nodded grimly. "That vendor is owned by her college roommate. The markup is 40% above market rate. There's more, but I need to be careful. She's the CEO's daughter." "Why are you telling me this?" He met my eyes. "Because in 23 years, I've learned that people who get pushed aside often see what others miss. Don't react yet. Just watch. Document if you can. And Alex," his voice dropped, "be careful. She's gotten very comfortable wielding power." After he left, I stood there processing. This was bigger than my hours. Much bigger. The following week, Vanessa's next move arrived via email. The company newsletter announced a restructuring of the holiday schedule. The 4th of July, which I'd requested off months ago for my father's birthday, was now mandatory, and I was specifically assigned. It was petty, deliberate, a flex. I checked with Derek, who looked miserable. "She specifically flagged you for that shift. Said something about ensuring equitable sacrifice from all staff." His tone suggested he knew exactly what this really was. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was policy, documented, official. Other employees started avoiding me in hallways. In their eyes, I saw the same calculation. Whatever I'd done to earn Vanessa's attention, they wanted no part of it. But here's what hurt more. Nobody stood up. Not one person. These are people I'd covered for, trained, helped. And now, faced with power, they scattered. That night, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I titled it Documentation and began writing down everything. Every irregularity Gerald mentioned. Every scheduling conflict that seemed targeted. Every moment of casual cruelty disguised as business efficiency. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. But I knew one thing. Vanessa believed her power was absolute. And that kind of certainty always created blind spots. Something shifted inside me during those quiet nights at my kitchen table. The hurt didn't disappear, but it transformed into something clearer, colder. I stopped hoping for fairness. I stopped imagining some authority figure would notice and intervene. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. Instead, I started preparing. I combed through every company policy I could access. I reviewed my employment contract with new eyes, looking for clauses I'd never considered important. I organized 7 years of performance reviews, commendations, and emails documenting my contributions. I also started paying attention differently at work. Not just doing my job, but watching patterns. Who approved what? When decisions got made? What processes Vanessa followed or didn't follow? Jordan noticed the change when we met for coffee. You seem different. Calmer, maybe. I'm just focusing on what I can control, I said. It wasn't quite the truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Are you looking for other jobs? I stir my coffee slowly. Not yet. I'm seeing how things play out. Jordan looked worried. Alex, don't do anything that could make this worse. These people have power. I smiled, and something about it made Jordan lean back slightly. I know exactly how much power they have. That's what I'm counting on. Gerald found me again 2 weeks later, this time in the parking lot after my shift. His face was grave. I found something, he said, unlocking his phone. He showed me a spreadsheet, vendor payments, dates, amounts. See these 3 suppliers? All implemented by Vanessa. All significantly overpriced. And look at the payment routing. I squinted at the screen. The payments weren't going directly to the vendors. They were being processed through a consulting firm first, which then paid the vendors. That consulting firm, Gerald said quietly, is registered to Vanessa's boyfriend. He takes a 15% cut of every transaction before paying the actual vendor. It's hidden in the invoicing as a logistics coordination fee. My breath caught. That's potentially illegal? Yes. At minimum, it's a serious ethics violation. She's funneling company money into her personal circle. He pocketed his phone. I've documented everything, but I can't report it through normal channels. Her father would bury it to protect her. What are you going to do? That depends, he said carefully. The quarterly board meeting is in 3 weeks. If this information reached certain board members, the ones not completely under the CEO's thumb, they'd have to investigate. Why are you telling me this? Gerald's expression softened. Because you deserve better than what she did to you. And because I've seen how carefully you work. You understand the difference between revenge and justice. He paused. There's a procedure for whistleblower complaints that bypasses standard management. I have the forms. If you're interested. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Gerald had told me and what it meant. I'd always followed the rules. Kept my head down. Done my job without complaint. And it had got me nowhere. Worse, it had made me vulnerable to someone who saw kindness as weakness. But there was something else Gerald had mentioned almost casually, the quarterly board meeting. A public forum where major decisions got reviewed, where board members could demand accountability. I pulled up the company handbook on my laptop and found a section on board meetings. Employees could submit formal concerns through a specific process. It required documentation, specific policy violations, and a formal written statement. I also found something else, a clause about retaliation. If an employee filed a formal complaint and subsequently faced additional negative employment actions, it triggered an automatic external review. The pieces started fitting together in my mind. Vanessa had power, yes, but it wasn't absolute. She operated within a system, and systems had rules. rules she'd ignored because nobody had ever challenged her. I opened a new document and began outlining everything Gerald had shared, everything I'd observed, everything I'd documented. Not emotional, not accusatory, just facts, dates, policies, and questions that deserved answers. By sunrise, I had a 15-page report. It was careful, thorough, and devastating. Vanessa grew bolder. Maybe she sensed my calm as submission. Maybe she was just drunk on unchecked power. She started appearing more frequently in the warehouse, always with that same entitled smile. She'd stop by my station, make casual comments about my reduced responsibilities, ask if I was adjusting okay to the changes. It was theater, performance, reminding everyone who had the power. One afternoon, she stood near the loading dock, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some people just aren't cut out for full-time work. Better to identify that early, right? Her assistants laughed. A few other employees, the ones who'd learned that agreeing with power kept you safe, nodded along. I kept working my movement steady. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't give her the reaction she was hunting for. Later, Derek pulled me aside. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This isn't right." I know. I met his eyes. "But it's going to be okay." He looked confused by my certainty, but didn't push. Nobody understood, yet that Vanessa had made a critical mistake. She decided I was beaten, decided I was too powerless to matter. And that carelessness, that absolute confidence, was going to be her undoing. The announcement went company-wide. The quarterly board meeting would be held on July 28th. All department heads required. Other employees welcome to attend the open session. I marked it on my calendar with a quiet sense of purpose. Gerald caught my eye across the warehouse floor that afternoon and gave the smallest nod. Everything was in motion now. I spent the next 2 weeks refining my documentation. Every claim needed to be bulletproof. Every fact needed sources. I cross-referenced vendor contracts, payment schedules, and policy violations. I prepared copies for each board member, organized in clear sections with tabs and summaries. This wasn't emotion. This was evidence. Jordan noticed I'd stopped complaining, stopped seeming stressed. "You're worrying me," my friend said over dinner. "You're too calm." "I'm just accepting reality," I replied. "Can't change what I can't control." But that wasn't quite true, because I was about to demonstrate exactly how much I could control, not through power, but through truth. The night before the board meeting, I laid out my professional clothes. I rehearsed my statement, keeping it factual and clear. I reviewed every document one final time. Vanessa thought she'd already won, thought the story was over, with her in complete control. She had no idea the real story was just beginning. The morning of the board meeting, Vanessa swept through the warehouse with even more confidence than usual. She wore a designer suit, her hair styled perfectly. Everything about her radiated certainty. "Big day," she announced to her assistants. "The board's going to love the efficiency improvements. Father's already impressed with the cost savings." Those cost savings, of course, came from cutting hours for people like me. People who'd actually built the company's reputation while she coasted on her last name. I watched from a distance as she rehearsed her presentation on a tablet. She was completely relaxed, laughing, treating this like a formality. Why wouldn't she? She'd never faced real consequences for anything in her life. Derek approached me during lunch. "You're coming to the meeting?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. He studied my face, tried to read something there. "Alex, if you're planning something." "I'm just going to attend," I interrupted gently. "It's open to all employees, right?" He nodded slowly, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. But he didn't push further. That afternoon, Vanessa made one final decision that sealed her fate. She scheduled me for a mandatory shift during the meeting's closing session, ensuring I'd be stuck working while she presented her success story. She sent the schedule change with a smiley emoji. Just a small, casual cruelty. One more reminder of who held the power. But she'd forgotten that mandatory schedule changes could be contested through the formal grievance process, which created a perfect paper trail, which gave me exactly the opening I needed. The board meeting began at 2 p.m. in the main conference room. I'd submitted my attendance through the proper channels, along with my formal complaint documentation packet, delivered to each board member that morning by certified mail. I arrived early, took a seat in the back, and waited. Vanessa presented first, her confidence absolute. She talked about operational optimization and resource efficiency. She showed charts with cost reductions, never mentioning that those savings came from devastating the lives of loyal employees. The board members listened politely. Her father, CEO Richard Carlisle, beamed with pride. Everything was going exactly as she expected. Then the board chair, an older woman named Patricia Aldridge, raised her hand. Before we move forward, I'd like to address a formal complaint that was submitted this morning. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia held up my documentation packet. This complaint alleges serious ethics violations, including vendor nepotism, financial mismanagement, and retaliatory employment practices. Ms. Carlisle, are you familiar with these allegations? Vanessa's confident smile flickered. What complaint? The one submitted by Alex Brennan, a 7-year employee whose hours were recently reduced to 15 per week without documented cause. Every eye in the room turned to find me in the back. I stood, my hand steady, my voice calm. May I address the board? Patricia nodded. Please come forward, Mr. Brennan. I walked to the front of the room, feeling the weight of every gaze. Vanessa's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence evaporating. Her father looked confused, then angry, but not at her. At me. Thank you for the opportunity. I began, my voice clear and measured. I've worked for this company for 7 years. My performance reviews are consistently excellent. My attendance record is perfect. 3 weeks ago, my hours were cut by 62% without warning, explanation, or documented cause. I looked directly at the board members, not at Vanessa. The decision was made by Ms. Carlisle as part of what she's called efficiency improvements. But I've documented a pattern that suggests these changes aren't about efficiency at all. I distributed additional copies of my evidence, organized by category. Financial irregularities, vendor relationships, timeline of retaliatory actions. These vendors, I continued, pointing to the spreadsheet Gerald had helped me compile, all implemented by Ms. Carlisle, all significantly overpriced compared to market rates. And this consulting firm that processes payments, it's registered to Ms. Carlisle's boyfriend, taking 15% of every transaction. The room erupted. Board members flipped through documentation. Vanessa's father started to object, but Patricia silenced him with a raised hand. These are serious allegations, Patricia said. What evidence supports them? I pulled out contracts, payment records, corporate registrations, all public information, all legally obtained. Everything is documented here. Vanessa finally found her voice. This is ridiculous. These are legitimate business relationships. Alex is just bitter about being targeted. I interrupted calmly. Let's talk about that timeline. I pulled up another document. On June 2nd, I was scheduled for 40 hours. On June 3rd, my hours were cut to 15. One day after I questioned a vendor invoice that seemed unusually high. On June 15th, I was assigned mandatory work on a holiday I'd requested off months earlier, one day after I mentioned the new office supply cost to my manager. I looked at Vanessa. Every action you've taken against me correlates directly with moments when I noticed problems with your implementations. Patricia leaned forward. Mr. Brennan, you mentioned you reported these concerns to your manager? Yes, Derek Foster. He's here today and can verify that timeline. Derek stood reluctantly, his face pale. It's true. Alex questioned several vendor relationships, and shortly after, Vanessa requested schedule changes specifically targeting Alex. The room fell silent. Vanessa looked trapped, her eyes darting between her father and the board members. There are explanations for all of this. Alex is twisting. The documentation speaks for itself, Patricia interrupted. Mr. Carlisle, you're obviously conflicted here. I'm calling for an immediate vote to suspend Ms. Carlisle's authority pending a full external investigation. Richard Carlisle's face turned red. This is my daughter. You can't. I can, Patricia said firmly. And I am. All in favor. 7 hands went up. Only Richard and 1 loyalist abstained. The next hour unfolded like dominoes falling. Gerald was called forward to verify the financial documentation. He presented his analysis calmly, professionally, devastating in its clarity. One board member, a stern man named Howard, pressed harder. Ms. Carlisle, did you or did you not implement vendors owned by personal associates without declaring the relationships? Vanessa stammered. They were the best options available. The relationships were disclosed in. Where? Howard demanded. Show me the disclosure forms. She couldn't, because they didn't exist. Another board member pulled up the company ethics policy on her tablet. Section 4.2 clearly requires written disclosure of any financial relationships with vendors or contractors. Failure to disclose is grounds for immediate termination of authority. Vanessa's confidence had completely shattered. She looked at her father desperately. Dad, tell them. But Richard couldn't save her. Not from this. Not when 7 board members were staring at documented evidence of ethics violations that could expose the company to legal liability. Patricia's voice was cold. Ms. Carlisle, effective immediately, your operational authority is suspended. You're barred from making scheduling, vendor, or personnel decisions pending the investigation's completion. Vanessa's face crumpled. The power she'd wielded so carelessly, so cruelly, gone in an instant. And everyone in that room had witnessed it. Someone asked me directly, Mr. Brennan, what do you want from this? I thought carefully before answering. I want fair treatment. I want transparency. I want this company to operate with integrity. Gerald stepped forward, his moment of validation finally arriving. I'd like to add supporting testimony, he said. I've been documenting these concerns for 3 months, but felt unable to report through normal channels given the power dynamics involved. He presented his own evidence, vendor payment analyses, cost comparisons, timeline correlations. Everything I'd said, verified by someone with 23 years of credibility. The financial impact extends beyond ethics violations, Gerald continued. These overpriced vendor relationships have cost the company approximately $340,000 in the past 6 months. That's money that could have maintained full employment for workers like Alex, improved equipment, or increased profitability. The board members looked increasingly grim. This wasn't just about Vanessa anymore. It was about the company's financial health, reputation, and legal exposure. Patricia turned to Richard. Mr. Carlisle, did you review any of these vendor contracts before they were implemented? Richard's silence was damning. He'd given his daughter free rein, trusted her implicitly, and never verified her decisions. One board member made the statement everyone was thinking. This is what happens when nepotism replaces competence. Vanessa looked like she might cry. Her perfect composure had shattered completely. She reached for her phone, and that single gesture would prove to be her final, fatal mistake. I need to make a call, she said, standing abruptly. Patricia's voice stopped her. Ms. Carlisle, sit down. This meeting isn't over. But the damage was done. Everyone had seen her reach for that phone, had seen the panic in her eyes. Patricia made a decision that changed everything. Given the seriousness of these allegations, I'm invoking Section 7 of our corporate governance policy. All of Ms. Carlisle's communications, emails, calls, messages for the past 6 months will be reviewed by our legal team. Vanessa went white. You can't do that. That's private. It's corporate property, Patricia corrected. And given that company resources were potentially misused, we have legal authority to review all communications conducted through company accounts and devices. Howard, the stern board member, looked at me. Mr. Brennan, you mentioned Ms. Carlisle's first call after payroll. What did you mean by that? I've been waiting for this question. 3 days after my hours were cut, I happened to be near the administrative office. I overheard Ms. Carlisle on the phone, laughing with someone, saying I told you it would work. He'll probably quit now, and we won't have to worry about him asking questions. The room went silent. At the time, I continued, I didn't understand the full context. But combined with everything else, the vendor relationships, the financial irregularities, the targeted retaliation, it suggests coordination. Patricia's expression hardened. We need those phone records. Now, within 20 minutes, the company's IT director arrived with a preliminary report. Vanessa's call logs showed multiple conversations with her boyfriend, the same person who owned the consulting firm, immediately after she made personnel decisions affecting employees who'd questioned costs. The pattern was undeniable, systematic, calculated. The unraveling happened fast. The IT director, now understanding the stakes, pulled additional records showing email exchanges between Vanessa and her boyfriend discussing problem employees and managing questions. One email, sent the day before my hours were cut, read, "Alex is getting too nosy about the supply contracts. Need to sideline him before he digs deeper." Another board member found vendor contracts with suspiciously vague terms, all approved solely by Vanessa without the required secondary authorization. The consulting fees her boyfriend's firm charged were buried in complex invoicing that obscured the actual markup. Gerald presented a final damning analysis. If the company had used market rate vendors, they would have saved enough money to not only maintain my full hours, but potentially hire 2 additional employees. Vanessa's father, Richard, finally spoke. His voice was hollow, defeated. "Vanessa, tell me this isn't true." She didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The evidence was overwhelming. Patricia stood. "The board votes to terminate Ms. Carlisle's employment effective immediately. Furthermore, we're referring this matter to external counsel for potential legal action regarding the financial improprieties." Vanessa's phone buzzed on the table. Everyone could see the caller ID. Connor Blake, her boyfriend. The man she called immediately after reducing my hours. The man whose company had profited from her authority. She reached for the phone, but Patricia stopped her. "That call will be reviewed as part of the investigation. Please leave your phone and laptop with security." Vanessa's face crumpled completely. She'd gone from untouchable power to unemployed and under investigation in less than 2 hours. Everything she'd built through nepotism and manipulation gone. The investigation moved quickly once it started. Within a week, the external legal team uncovered the full scope of Vanessa's scheme. Her boyfriend's consulting firm had indeed been taking 15% of every vendor payment. But it went deeper. The overpriced vendors were also giving kickbacks to Connor, who then split the money with Vanessa through carefully structured gifts and loans that avoided direct paper trails. The total amount they'd extracted from the company, $427,000 over 6 months. The phone records told the rest of the story. After cutting my hours, Vanessa had called Connor saying, "Problem solved. He'll either quit or shut up now." When I'd questioned vendor costs, she'd texted him, "We need to accelerate the timeline. People are noticing." And that call, right after payroll, the one everyone had wondered about, the transcript was included in the legal report. Vanessa celebrating how she'd handled me and discussing which other employees might need similar treatment. It wasn't just corruption. It was systematic retaliation against anyone who threatened to expose the scheme. The district attorney's office began their own investigation. Vanessa and Connor were both facing potential fraud charges. Her father, Richard, wasn't implicated in the scheme, but his negligent oversight cost him his CEO position. The board forced his retirement. And me? Patricia called me personally. "Mr. Brennan, the board would like to offer you full restoration of your hours, back pay for the period you were reduced, and a formal apology." "Thank you," I said quietly. "But I'd like to request something else." The settlement hearing took place 3 weeks later. Vanessa and Connor had hired expensive lawyers, but the evidence was overwhelming. They accepted a plea agreement, restitution, probation, and permanent bans from holding corporate positions. I attended, sitting quietly in the back row. Vanessa never looked at me. She couldn't. Facing me meant facing the reality that her casual cruelty had destroyed her life more thoroughly than she'd ever imagined destroying mine. The judge addressed her directly. "Ms. Carlisle, your actions demonstrate a profound lack of ethics and judgment. You use your position to enrich yourself at company expense, and you deliberately retaliated against employees who questioned your decisions. This court finds such behavior reprehensible." After the hearing, Patricia and several board members approached me. "Alex, we owe you more than back pay. Your integrity and courage saved this company from potentially catastrophic damage. We'd like to discuss a new role with you." What they offered surprised me. a position in operations oversight, with authority to review and approve vendor relationships and implement transparency protocols. It came with a significant raise and the explicit mission to prevent what Vanessa had done from ever happening again. But more than the job, they offered something else: public acknowledgement. At the next company-wide meeting, they would formally recognize my contributions and apologize for the injustice I'd faced. Gerald smiled when I told him, "Justice, not revenge. Just like I knew you'd handle it." 2 months after the board meeting, I stood in front of the entire company at a special assembly. Patricia handed me a formal commendation for integrity and ethical courage. "Alex Brennan represents what this company should value," she announced. "Not privilege, not connections, but competence, integrity, and the courage to speak truth even when it's difficult." The applause was genuine. My coworkers, the ones who'd avoided me during my lowest point, now looked at me with something like awe. I'd been the disposable one, the cautionary tale. Now I was proof that systems could work, that truth could prevail. Derek approached me after the ceremony. "I should have stood up for you sooner." "I'm sorry. You stood up when it mattered," I replied. "That's what counts." The new role transformed my relationship with work. I implemented transparent vendor review processes. I created clear channels for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. I trained managers on ethical decision-making. Every policy I created, I thought about the person I'd been: powerless, targeted, dismissed. I built systems to ensure nobody else would face what I'd faced. But I also thought about Vanessa sometimes. Not with anger, but with something closer to pity. She'd had every advantage: wealth, education, connections. And she'd squandered it all because she'd never learned that power without ethics is just tyranny waiting to collapse. Gerald retired 6 months later, satisfied that the company's finances were finally transparent and ethical. At his retirement party, he pulled me aside. "You did good, kid. Really good." 1 year after that devastating email, I sat in my new office reviewing vendor proposals. My title was Director of Operations Integrity, a position that hadn't existed before me, created specifically to prevent the kind of abuse I'd experienced. The work was meaningful. I'd helped implement changes that protected employees, saved the company money through legitimate cost analysis, and created a culture where questioning wasn't punished but encouraged. My father's medical bills were paid. My rent was current. I'd even started saving. But more than financial stability, I'd reclaimed something Vanessa had tried to take: my dignity. Jordan met me for lunch that afternoon. "You seem different. Lighter, maybe." "I feel different," I admitted. For years, I defined myself by being reliable, being helpful, being invisible. Now I realize I can be all those things and still demand respect. My phone buzzed. A text from one of the warehouse workers. "Thanks for helping with my schedule issue. The new system actually works." That message meant more than any award. Because the real victory wasn't just what happened to Vanessa. It was building something better from the ashes of her cruelty. I kept one thing from that terrible Tuesday afternoon: the original email cutting my hours. I had it framed in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that injustice, when met with integrity and courage, doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning. Vanessa had tried to make me invisible, disposable, powerless. Instead, she'd revealed exactly how powerful truth could be when wielded with patience and precision. Sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who create your greatest opportunities. They get careless, confident, convinced of their own invincibility. And that's when quiet people, the ones they dismissed, the ones they thought were beaten, become unstoppable. I'd been told I wasn't needed. Now I was irreplaceable. Not because someone handed me power, but because I'd earned respect through integrity, patience, and refusing to let cruelty define me. The email that was meant to destroy me had instead become the first line of my transformation. And that made all the difference.